right. Good afternoon, good morning, everyone. My name is Dr. Patrick Lockwood, and I'm here with my good friend,
Sebastian DeRosa.
And this is the Alchemy of the Mind podcast. And we're here having conversations about culture. What cultural phenomenon should we discuss today?
Today, we are going to discuss the fear in propaganda and its degrading effects on culture or on society.
Okay, so it's a giant topic. So let's pick some specific examples and let's kind of expand from there.
Just like how we're seeing violence escalate based from that fear. Like, we were discussing like the woman there was a couple of parents who had their child slashed across the face by some random woman. And not saying she was necessarily, that some specific propaganda or fear. We don't know anything about that case, but or the woman in Florida who, stabbed herself a bunch of times in the stomach because she's over Trump's presidency. But I just think there's these things that are kind of signifiers of degrading, society, and people also like you discussed in your book, like asocial behavior versus tribalism.
Yeah.
How people are slipping more into, into their tribes and dividing in that regard.
Yeah. And I think it's kind of ramping up nowadays because we're getting closer and closer to the actual campaign. I mean, I have no clue when the campaign actually starts in this country. It seems like it's like a never-ending thing where the people are always politicking and always platforming themselves. I don't think
because everything needs to be political.
Yes,
because that's what they think.
Literally.
And the other weird thing to think is I thought we've been seeing that there's so much, there's been all these leaks, right, about Google lying and fairness algorithms and all that shit. And what it makes me think, though, is people have been already given so much propaganda,
right?
Especially on the left, to where they think they're okay with people cheating to try to stop like another Trump presidency. Right. That's the thing. There's not this want for things to be fair because they believe that it was Russia or whatever other bullshit propaganda they believed in. They believe that, so they don't. They believe it's this kind of the tit for tat mentality, which I think is the tit for tat and the us and them is really what we're caught up in currently, or the world was caught up in.
Well, absolutely. I think that there's a significant portion of the country, from what I can tell, that really is caught up in the tit for tat. And it goes from the bottom to the top, honestly. Now, it might be more exaggerated on the coasts in the United States. Mm-hmm. Maybe people in the Midwest where I'm from aren't as talking about this and as worried about it. They're probably just doing their daily lives more so. But I mean, it's so bad and it's so profound and it's so let's call it normal. It's normalized now that even Donald Trump's whitehouse.gov page or whatever, or campaign, I think it's his campaign page, has that tit for tat thing going to where it's a friend sent me a screenshot of this. If you search for something on Donald Trump's campaign website, mm-hmm. and there's no page to be found there, the typical error 404 page has a picture of Hillary Clinton, and it's nothing can be found here. She's irrelevant is what the joke is, right? So that trolling, that us versus them trolling, goes all the way up to him.
Yeah,
and how he runs that campaign page, right? So it's it's literally being emanated from the top down.
Which is funny because I feel even if there is an attempt, I wonder, is that this expectation that's been created of him and then he fills it? Or is that initially how he is? I guess I don't know. And it probably doesn't matter.
Well, but it's a good question, though. Are we just filling in or working towards expectations that are created? Or is it something that people who are naturally at the top of the hierarchy will do? That's a fair question.
Yeah. Well, and I think I used to observe that at the beginning where it's people wouldn't if he did something positive, they won't look at it. So the thing is, if you're doing something positive and people won't look at it and they're only going to grab negatives,
yeah,
I do feel there's much more of a tendency to get the fuckets.
Yeah.
And then to be people, and he loves the attention. He loves to make, he loves that. So he's if I do this, people are going to, he likes the trolling in that way that it gets, did you see his thing about Greenland?
No.
Wasn't it Greenland where he put up a meme and it was I promise not to build, or I promise not to do this in Greenland or whatever. And it's like Greenland with like a huge Trump Tower in the center of Greenland.
That's funny.
You know, just like, I think it was Greenland, right? That's what he was talking about buying.
Yeah.
And so it was funny. I mean, there's some really funny stuff that he says. It's like trolling, but it's like, again, it's like, what is this, you know, accountability and having someone who's like running the country?
Right.
But then again, you look at all of them, and the thing is, they all don't behave like, they behave just as badly, if not worse sometimes.
Absolutely.
You know?
Yeah.
Where they're like more, I mean, I don't know. I think he's hyperbolic. They're more prone to just lie and be, I don't know. I think they're all, you know, kind of disgraceful, but.
Well, and I think that's part of the problem. And I think as we see more and more of supposedly our leaders, if you want to call them that, acting disgraceful and acting primitively, guess what's going to kind of translate down the hierarchy, downward to other people, is that same disgraceful, incendiary, fear-driven aggression, right?
Oh, for sure.
That's totally what's going to translate. So that stabbing thing you mentioned and the cutting thing, if those are related to politics, then absolutely. You know, we have people who are willing to basically verbally joust all day long on Twitter and on news kind of segments and stuff like that, and just kind of try and quote unquote destroy each other.
Well, and now that culture has been created, and that culture is also wrapped into social media business, right? It's like now everyone, like, I watched this talk the other day where it's about, like, you know, say a flat earther, they have this belief system, they build a whole channel around it. They basically build a career around an idea.
Yeah.
They see something and goes, oh, maybe my idea was actually not true. But
Right.
for them to evolve on that idea, or a person even to evolve their personality when they've attached to their persona, of how, you know, the crowd perceives and wants them to be, then they stop evolving, right? Or changing their character. And then if we have this I feel like kind of like the Pandora's box is open now too.
It is.
And I don't see with the current state, unless we lost tech, I think unless we had, like, you know, like we had like an EMP and lost, you know, power.
Is that what we need? We need like the end of the Matrix? Is that what it's?
It makes me wonder, because I feel like now there's this whole thing where, so say someone else gets in, right? Say Trump doesn't get 2020.
Right.
Someone else comes in. Well, then it'll just, and then it's going to be, it's not like people are going to go, oh, okay, everything's normal now. It'll flip again, and it'll keep, I just don't see how it resolves.
Okay. So I think
that sounds hopeless, but.
I don't think it's hopeless. I think it's a natural concern because of where we're at, right? So we're in a place where it seems like I want to emphasize the word seems. It seems like things are continually getting more and more out of control, right? That's the public perception we have, partially thanks to all of our news media friends who are in the mainstream kind of area, and even our alternative friends. Like you and I have been chatting for a while about how Tim Pool seems to get angrier and louder and more worrisome, and it's kind of
drawn out.
Yeah, it kind of drones on and on in the same worried tone of voice, and it's like, well, okay, so now you're just no better than Fox News or CNN at this point. So there's this. It's like a bug that people catch when they start to get prestige, which is to worry out loud in long incendiary phrases. And even though I think that's the perception we're given by the news and by our, let's say, word of mouth misperceptions of reality, I don't know that that actually matches up with the data on, like, rate of crime, rate of hate crime, rate of violence, rate of politically motivated violence, etc. All these different kind of metrics that you could use, like the DOJ website. I don't know that actually matches up. I don't know that people, like if you did a Pew poll survey and just, asked people about the number of verbal conflicts they get in every week about politics, I wonder if that number is increasing or decreasing. I bet it's decreasing, honestly.
You think it's decreasing? I think, but it's decreasing too because people won't talk anymore.
Yes, and to a degree, I'm with you. I think that's partially good and partially not good.
That people aren't. Well, yeah, but but the thing is, what people are being inundated by information-wise is saturated with it. So they're not having the interpersonal conversations, but they're being hit with propaganda, media, and all that is saturated by the politics. then they're not going to have really a nuance, they're not being really introduced to nuance, especially as we know that, like, I mean, the thing that gets me about the Google thing that's really been stressing me is so many people like Google it, right? That is like, that is primarily used by 95% or some huge amount of people.
Yeah.
If we know now that that is overtly lying to people, right? And, skewing data to fit an ideology, which means then I think we talked before about how there's the things the things you don't know, and then the things you don't know that you don't know.
Agreed.
And if you can't even have the possibility to access the things that you don't know, like that's actually been moved out of the window, because where you would get your media and where your trust has been placed is misplaced.
Yeah.
Then how do you even have the option? I don't know.
I think this is the problem of not being informed consumers, right? So we hear a news story or we hear a talking head bring up a concern like this, right? Like, we're getting biased information. So the thing I've always been hearing is that, like, during the election, Google was very, very biased against Donald Trump and his campaign. That's what I kept hearing all the time. Mm-hmm. So then we start doing research, right? Because that's what social scientists do. And they actually started doing research, and Steven Pinker posted a couple of actual like research articles where they did some analyzing of Google's metrics and data and all that stuff. And what it found was actually that's not the case. It's not the case that Donald Trump's search terms or whatever were lower in the Google search list. They were actually higher compared to other things, if that makes sense. So the narrative that we're getting is that, Google was against Donald Trump in the sense that, he wasn't very searchable, but that's actually not true. He was highly searchable.
But it was searchable with a bias.
Right. And that's the thing that the research doesn't study. So this is where nuance becomes extremely important, right?
Oh, yeah.
So on the one hand, people make broad accusations that there was a bias against Donald Trump where people couldn't learn about him and they didn't get the truth. So the truth is, all of the search terms related to Donald Trump were highly searchable, good and bad, biased and unbiased, right? Mm-hmm. It's just that we don't have good control over which one gets promoted first, the biased ones or the unbiased ones. But
we know that they're promoting the biased ones.
We know that there's a percentage of them that are promoted. That's what the researchers showed. It's not that all of them were promoted. It's just that a percentage of them were promoted, right?
Well, it's like the other day I was trying to explain to someone, I was talking about the 5 top lies about Trump. And then I was trying to pull up this video that Sticks, Hex, and Hammer did. And I would it was driving me crazy because I would search lies about Donald Trump or the truth about, and it would, every time it would switch Donald Trump lie, and it was literally, and then all mainstream.
Yeah.
That's what, by the way, which Susan Wojcicki in a recent release said that they will be promoting authoritative. They'll be authoritative sources.
Yeah.
Mainstream sources. It's just.
Yeah. And that's the prestige game. So if you're popular and you're in power, then we're going to do whatever.
But they're not popular.
Who isn't?
They're like the mainstream media and the news. What they're deeming authoritative sources aren't actually popular. They're they're just mainstream, and they're what they want to promote.
Right, and that's mainstream, I guess, is one metric for popularity. I guess you could call it that.
Well, and they're popular with them. They're what they believe the popular opinion should be.
Sure.
But if you look at view counts, it should be probably people I don't know how they compare to other things, but I'm sure when it comes to mainstream media news and Tim and Sticks and these people, I'm pretty sure they're, especially on YouTube, are much more, which is interesting from a business standpoint. To me, I would think the business would, if they looked at it, honestly, they would see that it's not a good direction that they're going.
Right. And I think that's where there's a bias towards certain data in their process. And that's unfortunate, but that's the way it works. The problem is these people, and that's what I want to emphasize, is that this is a group of people. These people have an agenda. So we're kind of expecting corporations to be like scientists. It's kind of one of the delusions I think we suffer from here in the United States, at least, or in other parts of the world. We believe that they should be fair, even though we have an instinct towards fairness and reciprocity. That is not how people act on the regular when under social pressure.
Well, and especially when from their view, like Donald Trump is like the ultimate evil. So in their view, what they're doing is fair in some ways.
Sure.
Right. Or they've demonized masculinity. So like promoting feminine, female voices and saying, oh, that there's equal this. To them, it is, that's fairness, but it's just dishonest. So.
Right. And that's the thing is we have such a very primitive brain and such a very primitive, how would you call it? A very primitive way of operating that we tell ourselves all sorts of fancy lies to keep ourselves kind of egotistically satisfied. But the truth of the matter is we're doing very primitive things to just kind of keep our basic status going. So we'll lie to ourselves, we'll self-deceive, we'll pay attention to only certain kinds of information, right? That's normal. And I think that's the thing is that to really combat the pandering, we have to kind of acknowledge that we're very susceptible to pandering.
Oh, and everyone is. Well, that's the hard thing. Like, realizing, over the past few years of how the bias I had, towards like conservatives or Christians.
Yeah.
And now how I don't feel that to the same degree or in the same regards. But I also noticed that bias has moved in some ways towards like authoritative leftists.
Right.
But they also too, they represent what I didn't like. It's like it's the traits that I don't like. It's not the group.
Right.
It's like the authoritative moral authority. And not to say there's not still conservatives and Christians who are like that. Of course, I'm in Seattle, right? So I'm exposed to the authoritative moral authority of the left, not the right.
Right.
That's another factor too, is environmental, right? We're all in different environments.
Yeah.
Like how, like you said, the Midwest, like what people care about and what they're experiencing is vastly different maybe than what we're experiencing here on the West Coast.
I would assume so. Yeah. So I think,
but again, it wraps in more into the us and them though too, because I know there's people here that just are like, look at the flyover states as them.
Right. Which is funny because on the one hand, people are terribly afraid of the concept of globalism and then we are all one, etc.
If we agree.
If we agree. Then there's the problem of the other side of the spectrum where they're quote unquote pro-globalism, we are all one. But then at the same time, they do these very divisive things like say us versus them, West Coast versus, Midwest, all this kind of stuff. It's fascinating how we have this natural instinct towards tribalism, towards being divided and seeing that we are different, even if we are trying so hard to feel like we are all one, right? You can't get rid of it, and people just don't acknowledge that. So I think that's where we need to start acknowledging that we are going to naturally self-segregate.
Yeah, oh, for sure. And then there is nothing, I think it's I try to think of the different ways that people can, I don't know. I'm not sure how the balance comes.
Well, I don't think we can actively control the balancing act, right? I think if we're mindful about our tendency to self-segregate, then the balance will naturally happen because at the very least we're thinking about to the degree to which we exclude people, right?
Yeah.
The whole point of all these social justice warriors and, the critical discourse analysts and the critical theory people is they're tired of people being excluded and feeling like less than an other. And at the end of the day, that's a perfectly reasonable and wonderful idea so that we get along better and have a better society, right? Because basically when we work together, things get better. When we divide ourselves, we don't do so well, right? So on the surface, that is a wonderful idea. Now, how that's carried out in practice is a giant discussion, right?
Yeah.
I think we all generally want the same thing, which is a sense of uniqueness and a sense of individuality and a sense of I fit with the tribe, but also a sense of we are together. And that's that dialectical tension between the two.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely think that that sides of like feeling included, by a group, I've been observing that in my own life now to where like my mom was talking to me about how they're going away for their anniversary for the weekend with it's kind of cute because I think for the first time ever, they've developed a bit of a friend group within my stepdad's family, and where they all hang out together and do things.
Cool.
Which we never really had. But then it made me conscious that I have my deeper connections are really scattered all over, and there are a lot of like really individualist, kind of people where I don't have, I don't really have that like group of friends to go do anything with anymore. Right. And it just made me think about the value of that.
Right.
And having lost that, and how, I don't know, how the perception, like I do think it's a helpful aspect.
And I think that we can replicate that in a bunch of places. At least I would hope so. And I don't know that we need to worry. So, see, this is the thing that I get stuck with, going back to the original kind of topic we brought up here of pandering. Yes, we're all bugged by pandering. I don't know, and I think it was Rolf Degen who posted a study on Twitter earlier yesterday that showed that people aren't quite as influenced by mainstream news as we think they are. So there's actually some fake news, not fake news, but there's this inaccurate perception of how badly people are influenced by the mainstream.
Oh, yeah. Well, that would make sense to me too, because most people don't like to be, what's the word? Not like play, like the way they talk to you on the news, oh yes. Just the tones. Like I've always been like, what the fuck? You're talking down like I'm a child, or like I'm stupid, or, like how they talk to people. I think most people, that's what's that word? Like when someone's not platitudes. Like when someone's like, not placating either. When someone's like, when someone's upset and then you talk to them like kind of calm like this, and then they get more upset.
Oh, patronizing.
Patronizing, yeah. I think there you go. That's the word. I think the news media is very patronizing.
Oh, absolutely.
How they discuss things. And I would imagine that it doesn't appeal to most people, because most people's ego doesn't like, people don't like to be patronized.
No, absolutely not. And I think that's why a simple adult conversation is probably what's going to keep winning out time and time again. This is why Joe's popular, right?
Long-form conversations. Yeah,
Joe Rogan's terribly popular because he actually sits down with people like Bernie Sanders and has a relatively involved discussion. Now, Joe could have dug a lot deeper when he was hanging out with Bernie, but for the hour that he had with him or whatever, it was a pretty good discussion. It made me think twice and three times about my opinions about Bernie.
Oh, right? For sure. Well, and when you get more of an authentic feel, because it's moving out of that patronizing kind of like, let's see. Because even the media is like keywords and fear. But we were just discussing this too. I was talking with my friend Jessica in Florida, who's there where the hurricane, the deadly, forceful, whatever other keyword to fucking activate people's fear system
right.
can be used. And she was talking about how this is fucking ridiculous. She's like, she was looking at the media and she's looking at how everyone's buying everything out. And it's just like, and even this, she's like, why can't they say it's this class 5, it's this potentially, but no, it's this destructive, just the language the media uses. But it is pretty wild to see how activated in fear people get from that. I remember when they did it here, when we had this potential storm coming that never even came. And I don't know if you remember that when I told you about it, but like the stores were full, like lines down. It was like, I'd never seen it before ever in here because we have such temperate weather.
Right.
But it was like, and then you did see then the effect of the media on people.
Absolutely.
That fear, right. Maybe that's it when it's coupled with fear is when I think that's when people are more prone to propaganda, when it's coupled with fear, because they're acting more via, primal emotional response rather than like, rational information.
Oh, absolutely. And that, again, I really think we will grow as a society. And I've been chatting with Heather Weinstein about this, and I think, without giving anything away, I think she and her husband are coming up with a good book on this. If we really had a solid understanding of how we were built and how, quote unquote, primitive that we actually are, we could actually advance in a number of really significant ways with all the technology we have, right? Because then we would have a mindful conversation, a dialogue between this is how primitive we are, this is where we'd like to go, this is what it takes to actually harness our instincts in such a way that we don't just become drones and slaves to our emotional states, right? we're not willing to have that conversation. I mean, the number of people that I've worked with professionally, and even people I've associated with here in Los Angeles, have zero clue about their instinctual process. No one has an understanding of the fact that their number one drive is basically threat avoidance and threat management, and that we have a natural tendency towards curiosity, and we have a natural tendency towards play, and we have a natural tendency towards connection. Just those 4 things I listed, no one's taught that. No one's explained in childhood, well, this is how we're kind of built. And we have these things that we have to understand, have a relationship with, and learn how to manage and get satisfied. No one has that conversation.
Yeah. Well, and when people don't have that, then they don't realize how their operating system is working.
Right. And that's the whole point behind, mindfulness-based relapse prevention and mindfulness-based stress reduction is like anything we can do to get off of automatic pilot will likely help us have more adaptive outcomes when it comes to work, stress management, craving management, whatever it is, right? Like the automatic pilot is killing us. So the goal for, I think, you and I here is to have these kind of nuanced conversations about culture that literally kind of jars us loose from automatic pilot, right?
Yeah.
Because that's the problem is even people like Tim are really kind of Tim Pool are getting into automatic pilot. And it's kind of like, I don't want to listen to you anymore. I haven't listened to him
for
like
sure.
2 months, 3 months.
Well, and I've told you, I've had a few times where I'm like, I'm listening to Tim, and I realize, and it's just like fucking watching a news story that induces fear. You know what I mean? It's like, it's playing it well, and it's like we talked about before too. It's kind of this like attracts like, and it's like he's like fear bait or fear porn about fear porn. You know what I mean? It's like, so it's like really, it's the same thing.
It's meta fear porn. I love it.
Meta fear porn.
Can we make that a hashtag and make a trend? Meta fear porn.
Tim Pool.
Love it.
We'll keep it something good.
And I think that's even a good point. I think we also need to have more fun because I think everyone's workaholic nowadays. Everyone's busy kind of keeping up with the Joneses. Everyone's trying to make it. I don't think
work has saturated everything.
Yeah. Just like politics has. It's like we're an oversaturated society, right?
Yeah, well, I keep saying this, Joe. I don't know if I've told you this concept, but that we've 80s, 90s, 70s, like times of discovery, right?
Yeah.
But then it's like we hit past a point where it became over discovery or something, or because I now feel like my new headphones. I'm so excited about these, these bone induction things. But there's so many amazing things that are now being discovered, but it's like we're so inundated and overloaded with discovery. Half the time people don't even know amazing things are being discovered, and 2, we're literally just inundated with so much that the possibility to even recognize our amazing evolution is not even maybe kept kind of from our eyes.
Absolutely. And to carry that point further and kind of put a fine point on it, even if you just pick a particular profession, right? So like academic, I'll use myself because I'm a quasi fake academic. So there's so much knowledge to keep up with, right? There's the replication crisis and all these other things in academia that are problematic. Mm-hmm. Most people who are walking around or who go to college don't know this, but there are over 60,000 different journals or something like that. That is an egregious amount of information that's coming out each year.
Yeah.
So there's literally no way, even if you're a specialist in a particular subdiscipline like neuropsychology or cognitive psychology or, evolutionary biology, there's almost literally no way to actually adequately keep up with everything that's being published nowadays.
Oh, yeah.
So we have literal information overload even for the specialists who are supposed to know things.
Well, and then layer on top of that, now we also have a lack of trust, right? So we've also lost our trust in it. So it creates it's a conflictive.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember when it used to be too, I could go and find, I love researching, right? And eventually it became fucking overload. There's just too much, and there used to be here's the source you go to for this, this new, accurate, and innovative information.
Yeah.
And it was now there's this many sources, and now there's this many, and now there's this much more information coming through. And it just, I don't know. It's weird to pop past that. I don't know, because our brains and how we function can only I don't know. It's weird. It's like we pop past that point of like optimal function.
Right, which is exactly why, in my opinion, we have come back to this place of being more primitive, because there was a time when we weren't as primitive, right? Like if you think about the mid 90s or late 80s, we were getting to this more sophisticated, more civil way of functioning, it seemed like, in the United States. There was still gang violence. There was still hate crimes. There were still all these problematic behaviors.
Yeah.
They weren't on display as much. They weren't lauded as much. You know, being aggressive wasn't lauded as much, right? So what I think happened was we got overwhelmed by a number of different things. Like I talked about, book, technology, religion, greed, all these things, right? Mm-hmm. Information overload, that we can't actually manage it. So our brain's going to shut down and go back to, well, not shut down, but it's going to stop using higher processes when they're overloaded and go back to more primitive processes.
Which are the fight flight, right? Like the fear base.
The instinctual ones. Yeah.
Which then in turn, again, that kind of wraps into like the, like we talked about, like fear and propaganda being bedfellows.
Yeah. You can't have one without the other, I think. I think if you're going to spin something, it's because you are afraid of threat or trying to manage a threat. Yeah,
because if you're not caught in fear, you're not going to be gripped by propaganda.
Right. You're just going to have a very cold, simple discussion of like, this is what it said. I don't know how to feel about it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So I think some of the solutions on the positive side include having an understanding of our instinctual process, maybe reading books that explain that, or watching videos that explain it.
What are what are some books you'd recommend?
Oh, that's tough because there's so many, right? I think if you want to understand your proclivities towards sexual behavior, I highly recommend David Buss. He's an evolutionary psychologist, and I highly recommend Jeffrey Miller. Jeffrey Miller's got a great book called The Mating Mind. It's a good one for sex. If you want to understand instincts like fear, we can read my book, The Fear Problem. If you want to understand altruism and empathy and stuff like that, I would read Paul Bloom. He's a Yale researcher. His book is called Against Empathy. It's a brilliant book. And if you want to understand our ability to like kind of succeed and progress in society, I would say Steven Pinker's Better Angels of Our Nature is a great book.
Is that his newest one? Or that's an older one?
No, his newest one is, what is it called?
Oh, I know, Enlightenment Now or some shit.
Yeah, Enlightenment Now, which is also a good one because it kind of rebuts the idea that society is continually falling apart.
Yeah, because we're told that. Because I think a lot of that is the mindfulness, the focus too, right? Like, what are we focused on? Right. We're focused on the cloud, which now, I mean, we do live in this time now where it is, I mean, it is brought up to me almost every day by different people that they're concerned, right? Yeah. So it's this thing where I don't know, I've never experienced that before in my life. So
yeah,
but that's why we're here,
right?
And conversations.
And I think the more that, so if we understand ourselves better, that's probably a good step towards getting there. But I think also what we're doing right now is important in terms of just conversation, right? If only we could shift the way that we talk about things, because grassroots, right, is like the most effective intervention for pretty much any major societal change, whether it's from Martin Luther King or Gandhi or all these other like world-renowned figures in history. Grassroots change got us to the point where we could make serious changes. Yeah. You know, I think the more we have better conversation that's evocative and at the same time nuanced, because there's nothing wrong with having evocative, emotionally grabbing conversation. It's just a matter of making sure that the emotional nature of it is not overwhelming us to the point where we can't think in nuanced terms about things.
Yeah, not getting dualistic, recognizing the nature that everything is both.
Right. It's a very, very confusing thing for people, though, is what I've noticed, is that they see emotion, they go, oh, bad.
Yeah, oh, for sure. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and it's hard to, like, I mean, that the past few years for me has been actually realizing that I'd always thought I grasped the concept of, like, duality.
Yeah.
You know, but I really didn't until, now I do, though. It's pretty wild to, like, see that we're like, oh, okay, like, destruction, construction are basically the same thing. They're just, it's kind of the perception of them.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what I mean by that?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah. And I just think that applies to all this. I think it's kind of a base.
Right. Understanding.
Meta base.
A meta base. Understanding that there's a difference between our perception of life and what actually is a big deal. Yeah. Huge deal. And I think that goes back to the understanding principle. So there's the understanding principle, there's the conversation principle. And then I think if I were to put a third thing in there, maybe advocacy, maybe we can develop better advocacy methods, whether it's, I don't know, maybe more nonprofits or watchdog groups that are kind of providing constructive solutions as opposed to like, what's the one I can't stand? There's one that's just like Human Rights Campaign. It's like all gloom and doom.
Oh, yeah.
Whereas like humanprogress.org is all about the things that are actually getting better, typically speaking. So if we could take the understanding of the problem that comes from Human Rights Campaign with the focus on constructive solutions and what's working from humanprogress.org and make them a single organization, that would be phenomenal, right? Mm-hmm. I think if we had more organizations like that could advocate in such a way on behalf of groups, on behalf of issues that wasn't negative and gloom and doom, I think things would get better.
Yeah.
And I think that also comes down to like individual advocacy, which is why, as much as I don't like the social justice warrior ethic, I understand why it's valuable and why it works, because that's how we're designed. We're designed to like worry out loud and quote unquote fight for a cause that we believe in.
Yeah.
I just think we should shift the way we engage in the fight part of the fight, flight, or freeze thing that we're going through.
Yeah. Well, and try not to be so ideological and actually seek information, not just let it be fed to you.
Absolutely.
Which I just think, unfortunately, because it has become that like a cult religion, it tends to just be like, oh, here's what you believe. You know, like I had this interesting talk the other day where I was on Tinder and talking to a guy, and then he ends up saying that he said something, and then I go, oh, and I thought I'm going to test the waters on this. I go, are you a feminist?
Oh,
he
boy.
Goes, yeah, intersectional.
Oh, God.
And I was like, oh, God. And so I ended up like, oh, you're part of that cult. And I totally started like shit talking a bunch.
Oh, boy.
But the funny thing is, so I'm figuring he's going to get mad at me. And it was so cute. He was like, oh my God, I love this conversation. He was like, I've just never, he goes, me and my girlfriend, who is, you know, because he's exploring being queer, even though he's never been attracted to a man, because she wants him to be queer, which at one point I had to point out, hey, it's this statement that you made actually that I'm basing this kind of off of. He's like, oh, good observation. But it was funny because he was really actually receptive, and he was like, oh man, we've really noticed these things about it. You know, so it was funny, like he was going with that belief system because it's being told to him. Yeah. But when someone that he's talking to even was just recognizing the irony and the hypocrisy, he was like, oh yeah, we've really noticed that, you know. So I thought it was really interesting to see that. That's good. Well, and that's that connectivity principle, right? Like where I immediately had a bias. When he said intersectional feminist, I'm like, oh, this guy's going to fucking, do you know what I mean? Yeah. And then it was really surprised me. His response was like, oh, you know, but given I'd had a response a couple days earlier with the guy that we just got into it because he was like that. So, sure. You know.
I think the use of humor is a good principle for having disarming conversation. I think disarming conversation should be our focus, right? I think it's a very productive tool, you know, motivational interviewing, et cetera. These are all the techniques that actually help people change because they're disarming, as opposed to having a fully armed conversation with aggressive statements and I'm right and all that stuff. You know, disarming helps.
Well, and it also made me really conscious of my own self and my own bias, right? So it's this thing like, that's why I always say too, like we have to be like remaining conscious and aware of our bias it takes vigilance. It's like a constant process. Like I would say like, you know, like if someone says they're woke, they're most definitely asleep because we have to be vigilant to be in a constant state of waking because everything around us is trying to lull us asleep.
Yes. Waking is an active process with the shift upwards in your cortisol levels and stuff like that. To wake up is an active process, not a passive process.
Yeah. You're not just there, you know, it's a process.
The other thing is, back to pandering in this experience, is we can even be so invested in pandering.
And pandering or propaganda?
And propaganda. Yeah, I mean, even propaganda, right? Like, that's probably the better word for it.
Well, they're tied together, I feel like, so.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And the propaganda machine is something you and I have been talking about. And I was just thinking of a special I saw. Did you hear about the Dave Chappelle special?
Oh, yeah, it was fucking great. I watched it.
Hilarious. And he was talking about kind of like the propaganda associated with the LGBT culture.
The alphabet people?
Yeah, the alphabet people. He said, like, it's celebrity hunting season, right? Like, there's this propaganda way of operating in terms of the messages we hear about things like, what did he call them? Juicy Smollett?
Juicy Smollett, yeah. Juicy Smollett.
Right? So,
and then you should have seen the news stories on that too. Dave Chappelle attacks and goes after Juicy Smollett. And I'm just like, what the it's just so hyperbolic and so propaganda, you know?
Right, exactly. And the thing is, he's kind of a fairly liberal creature, but he is attacking the propaganda machines of, you know, modern social justice, all that stuff. And people still lambaste him for it, even though he's on their side.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, what's funny, the response to that, too, I'm glad you brought it up because I wanted to tap into it a little bit, is initially, right? So he talked about cancel culture specifically and how they would react. And then what's funny is initially they started reacting like that. And then did you see the shift that happened?
No.
And they became, oh, this is boring and old and he's not relevant anymore.
Oh, really?
Because they realized, I think, that they were playing out exactly what he said they would do.
Yeah.
And so then in turn, oh, now he's boring and he's washed up. And so then they go into insulting and saying that it's like, it's just funny. It's so obvious.
Yeah.
Like, oh, I'm so grateful I don't have to run into like the people that do that shit. You know what I mean? Like the people that are these propagandists and that, you know, these writers for all these, you know, woke media sites.
Yeah.
Ugh, dreadful people.
Right. And I think that's why kind of the marketplace of ideas is the best place to win this fight in a positive way, where we have more people putting out even positive spins on problems, right?
Yeah.
Not that we're in denial or naive about oppression or racism or sexism or heterosexism, whatever the problem is du jour. I think if we can have a positive spin of like, okay, X, Y, and Z bad things have happened this year. However, the number of people getting gay married is going up, or the number of people, or the number of hate crimes is going down. Like whatever it is, right? Like being able to say this and this is going to be such a valuable thing.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. And I think people recognizing their own natures, you know, within all this, I don't know, it made me think of that, but like, you know, how during his act, he talked about about white people on heroin.
Yeah.
And he talked about how he understood now how people during the crack epidemic felt. Cause he's like,
right.
Yeah, we just don't give a fuck. And it just made me kind of think of that nature of this tribalist nature of people and about how like over the years being in the gay community, I always watch the gay community talk shit about straight people.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like I watched that same thing back and forth. And I think it's that recognizing that the hypocrisy and the nature. And that's that whole thing where I would say people need to take a look in the mirror.
You bet.
Mirror, you know, and recognize their own. And because I feel like since Trump, like this whole process has been when I really looked in the mirror. But then again, that process has to be constantly looking in the mirror and being vigilant because again, it's like just watching my reaction to this guy, John, and then seeing, oh, like, I don't want to just be, you know, it's hard not to get caught up in that bullshit.
Absolutely. It's very, very difficult. And I think
the pull of the us and them.
Yeah. The tribalistic pull is always going to be there because it's hardwired into us. And now what exactly triggers our more tribalistic responses is going to vary from person to person. Some people are going to be more tribalistic about race or religion or sex or money or ethnicity or where you're like, whatever. It's going to vary from person to person, but we all have this basic us versus them kind of mentality, and it's unavoidable. To your point about it being something we need to always continually check, to always be self-reflective, the thing that sticks out to me as you describe that twice now so far in our chat here is I can't think of another process on the planet that humans engage in where that's not necessary if you really want to have a good life. So like if you want to exercise, right, and get better physical health, you can't just eat salads for a month or whatever and exercise for a month and then be good for the remainder of your 40 years of life. You have to continually exercise.
Yeah.
You have to continually try to eat better. You have to continually try to be, intimate in conversation with people you're dating. You have to continually try to hone your craft as a musician. You have to continually try to hone your craft as a thinker. You have to. There's nothing on the planet that you just do and you're good.
Yeah.
But even business.
Yeah,
there's literally no business where it's like you make $1 million and you just sit there for the rest of your life.
Yeah, totally.
Nothing.
Practice.
So
it's practice.
Having a practice-oriented mindset, that's why I like the concept of beginner's mind from Zen Buddhism. You're always focusing on just doing the practice because the practice in and of itself is worth practicing. And any exterior gain is irrelevant because theoretically speaking, if you're doing quote unquote the right thing by just engaging in Zazen or whatever the practice is, you're going to be okay no matter what. Right. Enlightenment is like this unintended byproduct of continually engaging in Zazen. So it's kind of the same thing with like financial success or relationship success. If you just do the bare minimum basics well on a consistent basis and you continually practice for the sake of practicing, things get better.
Yep. Oh yeah.
And that's literally true for everything.
And especially in this regard,
Yes.
And that's seeing that. And I think that's that too, again, stepping back and looking at our, how primitive we can be. Because I think there is a natural thing too within the us and them is pretty primitive and it's pretty wired into us, isn't it? I mean, that's like fucking historically that is in our epigenetics.
It's in everything.
Yeah, it's in everything.
There's just no species that doesn't have that.
Well, do you see the new research about phobias? About the epigenetics? There's new research saying, and I'm not going to say this precisely right, but this is the general gist, is that they basically, and I think it's kind of comes to epigenetics, but they're finding that they believe memories are actually brought through the DNA.
So I've heard that theory a number of times, and the problem is we don't have a lot of robust data.
There's not more that's there's something recently that just come out. I'll look for the video that I had, but
I mean, there are a handful of studies that talk about kind of the epigenetic process in memory through generations. The problem is so very limited, like only hundreds of participants have been examined. And it's very hard to control.
It makes sense.
Yeah,
it makes sense to me from phobias, because to me, I'm a big person where someone's like, oh, this past life, that's always made my bullshit radar go off.
Yeah.
But to think that our genetics or our blood, something in there maintains the memory of people in the past doesn't surprise me. Well, so the fact that somehow someone could have connected to some, relative in their past, that somehow that trauma or that memory was brought through their genetics or their blood and then somehow reinforced that phobia or trauma in them, that doesn't seem far-fetched to me. It seems pretty possible.
Well, right. So the common thing, there's this great article in the magazine, I think it's Aero, AERO, by Laith Al-Shawif. He's an evolutionary psychologist, and he talked about the six misconceptions about evolutionary psychology or whatever. And one of them is addressing this. It's that it's not that we're born with an innate fear for spiders or snakes. It's that we're born with a sensitivity to learn very easily that these things are threatening and bad because of hundreds of thousands of years of us understanding and experiencing that these things could be dangerous. So it's
is it also because something's different than us too? Because I think there's a large base of that, because I'm kind of tying that back into the whole tribal, us and them mentality too.
Right. So we're born with a sensitivity to easily learn that this other group is scary, that this other kind of person is scary. So we're not born thinking or believing or knowing that X, Y, and Z person is bad or that snakes are bad. We're not born knowing that. What we're born with is an exquisite sensitivity to certain things that have been replicably scary over history.
Well, and it's interesting to look at it from a different standpoint too. Like, a spider has 8 legs, right? Like a snake has no legs, right? So there's these drastic differences from us that would make sense where that like response to differences.
Sure.
And I think that's part of our bias protection kind of system too.
Absolutely. Absolutely, because we need to keep our biases alive in order to survive and be part of our tribe.
We just have to keep conscious of those biases at the same time. And that is the...
Right. So understanding, conversation, consciousness, and advocacy. Those are the 4 kind of broad frameworks we can use to kind of live a better life and have a better society if we want.
Yep.
Self-understanding, more nuanced conversation, self-consciousness or awareness, and then advocacy.
And digital balance.
Oh, gosh. We got to talk about that again soon. Yeah.
Yeah, let's do that again soon.
All right. Cool.
Well, I think we stayed mostly there and maybe explored the outer ranges of that conversation. And I like it.
Oh, we did okay. Yeah.
I think so too. Cool.
Well, thank you all for listening and for liking, sharing, and subscribing. Please do so. You can find us on minds.com. and on YouTube, and then maybe in the very near future, another video platform, video hosting.
Yeah, we're looking at BitChute. And also, I'm going to turn in our thing to iTunes. So hopefully we can get on there. We have enough episodes with intros, I think, to do it. It takes 5. So maybe we have 3, but
that's all right.
We'd always add some to the past ones or whatever. You're like, no.
Sure, yeah.
Sure, yeah, that only took 3 hours.
Yeah, no big deal.
3 hours, yeah.
Okay, well, we hope you all have a good day, and we will talk to you soon.
Thanks.
Bye.